What if I told you that a single decision by King Charles could shatter the fragile balance inside the monarchy, and that Meghan Markle, once the most talked-about royal figure in the world, has just been pushed down from the pedestal she fought so hard to climb? And what if I told you that the woman stepping into the very role Meghan once held, the title of Duchess of Sussex, is none other than Zara Tindall, the very royal who for decades avoided the spotlight, shunned titles, and wanted nothing to do with the trappings of monarchy? Sounds impossible, right? And yet, here we are. This isn't just another chapter in the long and messy saga of Meghan Markle versus the firm. This is something far bigger. Because in this story, a king takes back control. A cousin accepts the one role she swore she would never touch. And Meghan? Well, Meghan finds herself staring at the harsh reality that for the first time, she's no longer the star of the show. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now, before we dive into the meat of it, let me ask you this. Do you believe Meghan's removal was inevitable, the result of her years of clashes with the royals? Or was this carefully orchestrated by Charles from the very beginning, a masterstroke in palace politics waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Hold on to that thought, because by the end of this story, you may see Meghan and Zara in a completely different light. Let's rewind the clock. When Meghan first joined the royal family, the world erupted in applause. An American actress, biracial, charismatic, and outspoken, she was billed as the fresh breath of air the monarchy desperately needed. Magazines declared her a modern princess. Millions tuned in for her wedding, believing they were watching a fairy tale in motion. But what happens to fairy tales when the shine wears off? When the cameras dim? When the crown starts to weigh heavier than the glittering tiara? That's where Meghan's story turned. What once was a triumph became a struggle. Reports of her clashes with staff, rumors of feuds with Kate Middleton, headlines about her and Harry breaking protocol time and time again. And then, of course, the infamous Megxit. The decision to step down from senior royal duties and head across the Atlantic in search of freedom, privacy, and independence. But here's the contradiction that never sat right with the public. She left the institution, yet she clung to the titles. She criticized the monarchy, yet she traded on her royal status in Hollywood. That contradiction? It planted the seeds of resentment within the royal family and within the British public. And who was watching quietly from the sidelines as Meghan burned every bridge she crossed? Zara Tindall, Princess Anne's daughter, the granddaughter of the late Queen. But crucially, Zara has lived her entire life without a royal title. She built her own career, forged her own path, and stayed far away from the dramas swirling around Buckingham Palace. For years, people asked, why doesn't Zara want a title? Her answer was simple: she didn't need it. She didn't want it. She valued her independence. And yet, fate has a cruel way of laughing at our declarations. Because now, Zara Tindall is the very woman stepping into Meghan's discarded shoes. The reluctant royal becoming the Duchess of Sussex. So what changed? Why now? And how did King Charles, a man often painted as indecisive or overly cautious, suddenly summon the steel to make such a ruthless decision? You see, Charles has watched the monarchy weather scandal after scandal. From his own messy divorce with Diana to Prince Andrew's disgrace, to Harry and Meghan's public criticisms, the royal brand has been bleeding. Something had to give. And Charles realized he couldn't let the Sussex title rot under Meghan's control any longer. If the monarchy was going to survive, he needed to remove Meghan. But stripping her outright would look too harsh, too tyrannical. No, the solution had to be cleverer. The solution was Zara. By offering Zara the title of Duchess of Sussex, Charles does two things at once. He reclaims control of the narrative, and he reshapes the monarchy's future. Because Zara isn't just any royal. She's respected, scandal-free, and loyal. And most importantly, she isn't Meghan. But here's the real twist. Zara never wanted this role. For years, she resisted. She built her identity outside the palace walls. She married for love, pursued her equestrian career, and raised her family without titles hanging over them. She was the example of what Meghan claimed she wanted: freedom without titles, independence without monarchy. So why would Zara finally accept the very thing she once rejected? Could it be pressure from her mother, Princess Anne, the famously no-nonsense royal who has always been the hardest worker in the firm? Could it be loyalty to her cousin, King Charles, who needed her to step in at a time when the monarchy was at risk of crumbling under Meghan's shadow? Or could it be something else entirely? A secret agreement, a private deal made behind closed palace doors? And that's where the story takes its sharpest turn. Because Meghan, upon hearing of Zara's sudden rise, was said to be seething. Imagine the humiliation. Meghan, who styled herself as a revolutionary, sidelined by the very woman who never wanted a crown. Meghan, who believed she could outmaneuver the firm, now outflanked by her cousin-in-law. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The actress who chased titles loses them to the horse-riding royal who never asked for them. But if you think Meghan took this lying down, think again. Because she would push back. She would scheme. She would fight to regain her influence. And Harry? Poor Harry would find himself caught in the middle, torn between his father and his wife, watching as his cousin replaced Meghan in a role he once believed was hers alone. That's the heart of this introduction. Betrayal, irony, power plays, family politics at their ugliest and most fascinating. But here's the real question for you. Do you believe Zara's rise signals a new era of stability for the monarchy? Or is it just the calm before another storm? Because make no mistake, Meghan wasn't going to vanish into the background quietly. Not after everything she sacrificed, not after everything she believed she'd won. And Charles? He wasn't finished either. This was just the first strike in a larger plan. And what came next? Well, that would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Every downfall has a beginning. Every fracture has that one hairline crack that eventually spreads until the whole thing collapses. For Meghan Markle, that crack began to show long before King Charles made his decisive move. And yet, the world didn't see it coming, not at first. The press painted smiles, the palace presented unity, and Meghan herself projected a dazzling image of modernity. But behind the palace gates, tension simmered, resentment festered, and the countdown to her removal had already begun. Now, let me ask you this. Can one person truly outshine an institution that's been around for more than 1,000 years? Or is the monarchy like an immovable stone, slowly grinding down anyone who dares challenge its weight? Meghan thought she could change the rules. She thought she could bend the system to her will. But the system was waiting, patient, biding its time. It all started with small things. Protocol breaches, as they called them. Meghan closing her own car door, a gesture that the media spun as either humble or rebellious, depending on which paper you read. Wearing dresses without tights. Speaking up during public engagements. To outsiders, these seemed trivial, even refreshing. But within the royal bubble, every action had meaning, every symbol mattered. To the palace, Meghan wasn't just breaking rules, she was testing the boundaries. And boundaries, in the monarchy, are sacred. The middle of this story is where the stakes grew sharper. Meghan wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just a duchess. She became a global figure, drawing headlines that outshone even Kate Middleton, the future queen. She was interviewed, photographed, adored. And that's when the whispers began. Meghan was overshadowing the monarchy itself. That's a sin the crown does not forgive. Can you imagine the conversations behind closed doors? Courtiers warning Charles that Meghan was becoming too big, too bold, too uncontrollable. Staff resigning amid stories of tension and tears. Kate and Meghan's infamous "who made who cry" dispute whispered in tabloids across the globe. Each incident might have been survivable, but together, they painted a picture. Meghan wasn't fitting in. She was rewriting the story, and the palace hated it. Harry, of course, defended her fiercely. He saw the media attacks as history repeating itself. His mother, Diana, hounded until her tragic end. He wasn't going to let Meghan suffer the same fate. But here's the contradiction. By defending Meghan against the institution, Harry placed himself in direct opposition to his own family. Every defense of Meghan was, in the palace's eyes, an attack on the monarchy. And that set the stage for the breaking point. Picture this. Charles sitting in Buckingham Palace, reviewing briefing papers. Reports piling up about Meghan's growing independence. Stories about deals, about her pushing boundaries. Each report feeding his frustration. Because for Charles, this wasn't just about Meghan. It was about survival. His reign had only just begun, and already, the cracks threatened to widen. If he couldn't control his own son and daughter-in-law, how could he command respect as king? And then, Meghan made the move that changed everything. She and Harry announced they were stepping back from royal duties, but they wanted to keep the titles, keep the funding, keep the privileges. To Charles, it was a slap in the face. To the British public, it was hypocrisy. You can't walk away from the monarchy while still cashing in on it, can you? Or can you? This was the breaking point. The monarchy could not allow Meghan to straddle both worlds. And Charles knew, deep down, that one day he would have to act. But what kind of act would it be? A quiet sidelining? A public removal? Or something far more cunning? A replacement that would sting Meghan where it hurt most? Here's where irony steps in. Meghan once declared she wanted to hit the ground running as a royal. Instead, she hit a wall. And as that wall closed in around her, the palace began searching for an alternative. Who could carry the Sussex title without controversy? Who could restore dignity where Meghan had brought drama? The answer came from an unlikely source, Zara Tindall. Think about that for a moment. The cousin who never wanted a title, the woman who avoided the palace spotlight, the one who quietly lived her life outside the royal bubble. Suddenly, she was being considered as Meghan's replacement. The ultimate contrast. The anti-Meghan. And that contrast is what made Charles's plan so devastating. By elevating Zara, Charles didn't just strip Meghan of power, he proved a point. That the monarchy doesn't need stars. It doesn't need Hollywood glamour. It doesn't need someone trying to reinvent it. What it needs, what it values, is loyalty, duty, and quiet strength. Qualities Zara embodied, and Meghan, in the palace's eyes, never did. But here's the question I'll leave you with at this point. Was Meghan doomed from the start, set up by a system that never wanted her to succeed? Or did her own ambition push her too far, too fast, until Charles had no choice but to intervene? Because as we'll see in the next chapter, Zara's rise wasn't just a palace idea. It was the product of years of careful observation, of watching Meghan stumble, of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, it was like a chess game. Meghan thought she was winning, but Charles was already 3 moves ahead. But what came next would flip the game entirely and reveal Zara Tindall in a role no one ever thought she'd accept. What if I told you that the woman who never wanted a title, who deliberately chose a life outside the palace spotlight, would one day step into the very role that Meghan Markle once claimed as her own? That's the irony of Zara Tindall's story. She wasn't groomed for it. She wasn't chasing it. She wasn't even remotely interested in it. And yet, here we are. Zara, the Queen's eldest granddaughter through princess, and suddenly emerging as the monarchy's most unexpected savior. Now, let's pause and really think about that. Isn't it strange how history works? The one who runs from titles ends up holding one of the most controversial of them all. The one who embraces duty reluctantly becomes the face of loyalty. And the one who wanted the spotlight, Meghan, finds herself cast aside. But to truly understand Zara's rise, we need to go back, way back, to the decision made by her mother, Princess Anne, when Zara was born. And, as you probably know, refused royal titles for both of her children. She wanted them to grow up free from the rigid expectations and suffocating scrutiny that came with prince and princess. It was a radical move for the time, almost rebellious in its own way, but it was one that shaped Zara's entire identity. Growing up, Zara lived like a royal, but without the title. She attended events, yes, but she also went to regular schools, mixed with ordinary kids, and pursued her passions. Horses became her world. Equestrian sport became her career. And unlike her cousins William and Harry, who were tied to duty from birth, Zara had space to breathe. She built her life around sport, competition, and family. This is where the irony deepens. Zara didn't need a title to shine. She became a world champion equestrian, winning silver at the London 2012 Olympics. She was honored with awards for her athletic achievements, not for her bloodline. She proved, time and again, that she could stand on her own without Her Royal Highness attached to her name. And isn't that the very freedom Meghan claimed to want? Independence, success, respect outside the palace system. But here's the kicker, Zara achieved it without drama, without fights, without endless headlines about betrayal and feuds. So why would Zara, of all people, finally step into the Duchess of Sussex title? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? For decades, Zara stayed clear of royal duties. She enjoyed the perks of proximity, but never carried the burden of responsibility. And yet, King Charles found in her the perfect foil to Meghan Markle. Because Zara has something Meghan never did: trust. She is trusted by her family, trusted by the public, trusted by the institution. She has never courted scandal, never undermined the monarchy, never sought to bend tradition to her own whims. Instead, she worked hard, kept her head down, and earned quiet respect. But let's not pretend Zara's decision came easily. For years, she said no. She turned down titles. She brushed off suggestions of royal duties. She made it clear that she valued her independence. So what changed? What could possibly have persuaded her to finally step into the very role Meghan had to relinquish? Some say it was her mother, Princess Anne, and has always been the most hard-working royal, the one who never complains, never stops, never bends. Her sense of duty is legendary. And Zara, though independent, shares that same DNA. Could and have reminded her daughter that sometimes duty calls, even when it's the last thing you want. Others point to loyalty. Zara has always been close to her cousin, King Charles. She was one of the few family members who supported him openly during his darkest years, when Diana's shadow threatened to consume him. Charles, in turn, has always admired Zara's resilience, her ability to navigate life without the constant drama that plagued others in the family. So perhaps, when he came to her with the offer, or the request, Zara saw it not as a title grab, but as a personal act of loyalty to her cousin, her king. But there's a third possibility, and it's the one that stings Meghan most. Could it be that Zara accepted because she wanted to prove, once and for all, that royal titles can be handled with grace? That the Sussex title, tarnished by scandal and controversy, could be restored by someone who never even wanted it? Imagine the symbolism. Meghan fought for that title, clung to it even after leaving royal duties, and now it's in the hands of a woman who once refused it. That contrast alone is powerful enough to shake the palace walls. And how did the public react? Shock at first, but then something surprising. Warmth, support, even celebration. Because Zara isn't seen as an opportunist. She's seen as someone who never needed the title, which ironically makes her more deserving of it. The people trust her precisely because she doesn't seek power. It's the paradox of monarchy. Those who want it least often carry it best. But let me ask you, do you think Zara truly wanted this? Or was she pressured, cornered, persuaded by a system that needed her? Was this a choice? Or was it destiny pulling her into a role she never asked for? Because here's where the story takes its sharpest twist. Meghan wasn't just losing influence. She wasn't just being pushed out. She was being replaced. And not by a rival socialite, not by another celebrity, but by her own cousin-in-law, someone who represented everything Meghan wasn't. This wasn't just about titles anymore. This was about legacy. Charles was making a statement. The monarchy doesn't belong to those who chase it. It belongs to those who serve it, even reluctantly. Zara's rise wasn't just a personal shift. It was a rebuke to Meghan, a symbolic stripping of everything she fought for. And Meghan? Imagine the humiliation. The sting of being replaced by someone who never even wanted what she craved. It was as if the palace was saying, this is how it should have been all along. But here's the cliffhanger. Zara may have accepted the role. She may have stepped into the limelight she spent decades avoiding. But Meghan wasn't going to let it slide. Because for Meghan, this wasn't just about titles or duties. This was about her identity, her brand, her power. And when Zara rose, Meghan decided she would strike back. But what Meghan did next would send shockwaves not just through the palace, but through the entire world stage. And no one, not even Zara, saw it coming. Defiance. That's the word that defined Meghan Markle in the days after whispers of her removal began to circulate. Defiance wasn't just a reaction, it was her entire strategy. Because if there's one thing Meghan has never done, it's retreat quietly into the background. No, Meghan fights. She pushes. She finds the spotlight even when others try to dim it. And when King Charles began quietly maneuvering her out of royal duties, Meghan chose her weapon, the public stage. Let me ask you this before we dig deeper. When someone is being cornered by an institution as powerful as the British monarchy, is their only chance of survival to bow out gracefully? Or is it to fight back loudly, defiantly, making sure the world hears every word before the palace shutters close? Meghan chose the latter. But in doing so, she may have sealed her fate. The build-up to her defiance didn't happen overnight. It began with her carefully chosen appearances. Meghan is no stranger to symbolism, and every outfit, every venue, every speech carried an edge. She appeared at charity events without palace approval, sending a clear signal: I don't need their permission to do good. She made subtle digs in interviews, weaving in stories about feeling silenced, trapped, or unsupported within the institution. She crafted a narrative of independence, one that positioned her as a woman wronged by the crown but rising above it. And here's the irony. The very public she was trying to win over was growing divided. Some sympathized, remembering Diana's struggles and seeing Meghan as the modern echo of that tragedy. Others, however, began to see the contradiction. Meghan claimed to want privacy, but constantly sought the microphone. She claimed she wanted freedom from the crown, but she clung to the very titles that connected her to it. Now, imagine the palace's perspective. For King Charles and his advisors, Meghan's public defiance wasn't just irritating, it was dangerous. The monarchy thrives on control, on image, on carefully choreographed appearances. Meghan was tearing through that fabric, rewriting the narrative live on international television. Every time she appeared, every time she spoke, Charles's grip on the Sussex story weakened. This tension built to a breaking point during one infamous charity event. Meghan arrived uninvited, walking the red carpet as if she were still a working royal. The cameras clicked. The headlines wrote themselves, and the palace was livid. To them, Meghan wasn't just being defiant. She was hijacking the monarchy's image for her own brand. But let me ask you, do you think Meghan was being strategic, or was she simply desperate? Was she trying to remind the world of her power, or was she clinging to relevance as it slipped away? Because here's where things get dramatic. Behind the scenes, palace insiders claim Charles confronted Harry about Meghan's actions. Tensions escalated in phone calls, in terse meetings, in whispered exchanges between courtiers. The king reportedly made it clear, if Meghan continued her defiance, the monarchy would respond publicly. And that's something the royal family almost never does. Still, Meghan pressed on. In a carefully crafted interview, she spoke about truth-telling and the need for transparency, drawing subtle parallels between herself and Diana. She portrayed herself as the outsider fighting against an archaic, unyielding system. The emotion in her voice, the carefully chosen pauses, the vulnerability, it was powerful. But for every viewer who sympathized, there were just as many who rolled their eyes, seeing it as yet another performance. And Harry? Poor Harry found himself caught in an impossible tug-of-war. Defend his wife, or maintain ties with his father. He tried to do both, but every statement he made only seemed to inflame the situation further. To Charles, Harry's defense of Meghan looked like betrayal. To Meghan, anything less than full support looked like abandonment. The cracks between husband and father widened, and the entire world could feel it. But here's the cruel twist. Meghan's defiance, rather than cementing her influence, gave Charles the justification he needed. Every unapproved appearance, every interview, every headline became evidence in the palace's case that Meghan was no longer fit to represent the crown. She thought she was strengthening her position. Instead, she was digging her own grave. And this is where the contradiction bites hardest. Meghan always said she wanted to be her own woman, free from royal constraints. Yet, when the palace finally prepared to strip her of her duties, she fought tooth and nail to keep them. Why? Because titles mean power. Titles mean influence. Titles mean brand value. Without them, Meghan was just Meghan. With them, she was the Duchess of Sussex, a title that still carried weight in Hollywood, in politics, in global media. So, the more Charles tightened the reins, the louder Meghan fought back. She wasn't just defying him, she was daring him. Daring him to take action, daring him to publicly remove her. And Charles, to his credit, stayed silent, for now. He knew that silence could be more powerful than words. Let Meghan rage. Let her vent. Every outburst made Zara's quiet dignity shine brighter in comparison. But Meghan's defiance wasn't finished. In fact, it was about to escalate into something far more shocking. Because whispers began circulating that she had a plan to use her Hollywood connections to wage a media war that even the monarchy couldn't ignore. She wasn't just going to stand on red carpets or give interviews. She was going to fight fire with fire. And that's the cliffhanger I'll leave you with here. Meghan may have been cornered, But she wasn't defeated. She had cards left to play, allies ready to be called, and a strategy that could either save her image or destroy what little credibility she had left. But what she did next would shake not only her relationship with Charles, but also her fragile bond with Harry, and it would push the monarchy to a place it hadn't been in decades: open confrontation with one of its own. Strategy. Cold, deliberate, and centuries in the making. That's what separates the monarchy from every fleeting scandal. You see, Meghan played the game like it was Hollywood: fast, emotional, impulsive. King Charles, on the other hand, played it like it was chess: slow, calculated. Every piece moving into place long before the opponent even realized the game had begun. And in this chapter, we uncover the strategy that changed everything. Let me start with a question. How does a monarch, constantly accused of being weak or indecisive, suddenly make one of the boldest, most ruthless moves in royal history? How does a man long overshadowed by Diana's memory, doubted as a future king for decades, rise to become the strategist who finally silenced Meghan Markle? The answer lies in Charles's understanding of the crown itself, an institution that has survived wars, betrayals, abdications, and scandals by one simple rule: adapt or die. The middle years of Charles's life taught him that survival isn't about brute force. It's about timing. He watched as his uncle Edward VIII threw away the crown for Wallis Simpson. He watched his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, maintain dignity through crises that could have destroyed weaker monarchs. And he learned the bitterest lesson of all through Diana: that losing control of the narrative is more dangerous than any personal failing. The crown survives only when it controls the story. And Meghan was threatening to seize that control. So, Charles devised his plan. Step 1. Silence. Notice how the palace never clapped back directly at Meghan's interviews, her claims of being silenced, her suggestions of racism within the institution. They stayed silent. Because silence, in monarchy, isn't weakness. It's power. Every unanswered claim became white noise. Every loud, dramatic interview from Meghan was met with the cool, unflinching stillness of the palace. To the public, one side looked hysterical, the other dignified. That was no accident. It was strategy. Step 2. Patience. Charles knew Meghan would overplay her hand. She couldn't resist the spotlight. She couldn't resist being seen. Every unauthorized event, every leaked story, every pointed remark was ammunition. Charles didn't have to act immediately. He just had to wait until Meghan gave him all the justification he needed. And she did, over and over again. But step 3. This is where Charles's brilliance shines. Removing Meghan wasn't enough. Simply sidelining her would make him look petty, even cruel. He needed a replacement. A counterbalance. Someone who would instantly reshape the story. Enter Zara Tindall, the quiet royal, the trusted granddaughter, the cousin who symbolized everything Meghan wasn't. By elevating Zara, Charles wasn't just removing Meghan. He was rewriting the Sussex brand. Think of it this way. Meghan had turned the Sussex title into a symbol of rebellion and controversy. By giving it to Zara, Charles flipped it back into a symbol of stability and loyalty. That's not just damage control, that's narrative mastery. And here's where irony comes in. Meghan once accused the monarchy of being stuck in the past. But Charles's strategy proved the opposite. He modernized monarchy's tactics by blending tradition with narrative warfare. Meghan played for the tabloids and the streaming deals. Charles played for history. And history always favors the crown. Now, let's add another layer. Some insiders suggest that Charles didn't act alone. He had advisors, yes, but he also had the influence of Princess and Zara's mother, and has always been the monarchy's iron backbone, tireless, blunt, and fiercely loyal. If and nudged Zara toward accepting the Duchess role, that wasn't just persuasion. That was decades of royal duty channeling itself into one decisive act. And what about William? Don't forget, Charles wasn't just protecting his own reign. He was securing William's future throne. Meghan's chaos, her constant headlines, her divisive image, posed a threat not just to Charles, but to the monarchy William will one day inherit. By removing Meghan and replacing her with Zara, Charles didn't just fix today's problem. He safeguarded tomorrow's crown. But let me ask you, and I want you to really think about this. Do you believe Charles acted out of cold strategy alone, or was there emotion here too? Did the years of watching Meghan overshadow his family finally push him into action? Was this about monarchy, or was it personal? Because while Charles appeared calm, insiders whisper that the hurt ran deep. He watched his son grow distant. He heard Meghan's criticisms, thinly veiled or otherwise. And for a man who spent his life waiting for this throne, who finally wore the crown after decades of doubt, Meghan's defiance felt like an insult not just to the monarchy, but to him as king. And so, Charles played his hand. With Zara in position, Meghan boxed into a corner, and Harry torn in the middle. The king's strategy was almost complete. But there was one final step. A moment where strategy would have to become action, where silence would turn into decree, where the crown would no longer just wait, but strike. And that moment? It came at a family gathering so charged, so tense, that those present still whisper about it today. A dinner where voices were raised, alliances tested, and Zara's reluctant acceptance finally sealed the fate of Meghan Markle's royal career. But what happened in that room, and the deal struck at that table, would unleash a storm far bigger than anyone could have imagined. And what came next would change the course of the Sussex saga forever, and no one saw it coming. Secrets. That's the lifeblood of monarchy. Behind the gold-plated gates, the polished smiles, the carefully staged balcony appearances, the real power plays happen in whispers, in closed-door meetings, in hushed conversations where even the walls seem to lean in. And in this chapter, we peel back that curtain. Because before King Charles could finalize his plan to replace Meghan Markle with Zara Tindall, there were secret meetings, palace intrigues, and late-night negotiations that would shape the future of the crown. Let me ask you this. If the monarchy thrives on secrecy, how much of what we think we know is just smoke and mirrors? How many times have carefully crafted leaks been planted to test the waters, to soften the blow, or to distract from the real story happening behind the scenes? This was one of those times. The first sign came quietly. Palace aides began speaking in vague terms about restructuring royal duties. Nothing official, of course. Just a whisper here, a carefully phrased line in the press there. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Change was coming. Meghan's position was no longer secure, and the palace wanted the public prepared before the hammer fell. Inside Clarence's house, meetings grew tense. Charles held private discussions with his closest advisors. William was consulted, though cautiously. The palace feared dragging him too deeply into the mess, while still presenting him as the future king above the fray. Princess Anne, however, was a central figure. Her reputation for bluntness and loyalty meant she didn't mince words. And sources claimed that in one particularly heated discussion, and told Charles flat out, "It's time to end this circus." But Zara wasn't so easily persuaded. That's the twist many people don't realize. For years, Zara had resisted any form of title or duty. She enjoyed her independence, her equestrian career, her family life with Mike and the children. Why would she suddenly agree to step into one of the most controversial roles in the monarchy? The answer lay in those secret meetings. Imagine the scene. A private dinner at Windsor, dimly lit, a handful of royals gathered around the table. Charles at the head, stern but measured. And to his side, arms crossed, eyes sharp, Zara and Mike listening quietly, weighing the gravity of what was being asked. The discussion wasn't about glamour or prestige. It was about duty. About protecting the monarchy from a woman, Meghan, who was turning it into her own personal brand. Charles laid out the stakes. If Meghan continued unchecked, the Sussex title would remain a weapon against the monarchy. Every appearance, every interview, every headline would erode the institution's authority. But if Zara took on the mantle, the crown could reclaim the narrative. The Sussex title would no longer be Meghan's shield. It would become Zara's sword. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? Zara, who never wanted the spotlight, suddenly staring down the possibility of becoming the monarchy's most crucial player. And Mike, ever the steady voice at her side, asking the question no one dared. What happens to Meghan when this goes public? The answer was silence. A silence so heavy it said everything. Meghan would be finished. Publicly humiliated. Privately furious. And Charles knew it. But here's where the intrigue deepens. Not everyone in the palace was comfortable with the plan. Some aides worried it would look cruel, vindictive even. Others feared Meghan's backlash, her ability to rally Hollywood, the press, even politicians to her side. After all, Hadn't she already secured billion-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify? Hadn't she shown she could command global attention with just one interview? Was it wise to provoke her further? Charles's response, according to insiders, was chilling in its clarity. The crown must endure. That was it. No theatrics, no drawn-out argument. Just the blunt reminder that individuals come and go, but the monarchy, if protected, lives on. And so, the plan moved forward. But secrecy was essential. Not even all members of the family were informed. William knew enough to nod his agreement, but kept his distance. Camilla, Charles's queen, offered quiet support, her years of surviving public hatred making her the perfect confidant. And Anne, unflinching as always, stood guard over Zara's wavering resolve. But here's the irony. While the palace worked tirelessly to keep these meetings private, the press somehow got wind that something was afoot. Leaks began to trickle out. Not the full story, just tantalizing hints. Rumors of a new duchess. Speculation that Zara might finally take on a role. And Meghan? Meghan noticed. She always noticed. Her response was predictable. More appearances, more carefully chosen speeches, more subtle digs. But the palace wasn't rattled. In fact, they welcomed it. Every defiant move Meghan made only strengthened the case against her. Every uninvited appearance, every unsanctioned speech became another reason why the monarchy needed a replacement. And so, the secret meetings continued. Advisors debated logistics. Lawyers reviewed the implications. Courtiers whispered about how best to announce the change without appearing vindictive. All the while, Zara sat in the middle of it all, torn between her desire for independence and her loyalty to family. Finally, one night, she gave her answer. Yes, she would take the title. She would become the Duchess of Sussex. But she made it clear, she was doing it for her family, for the monarchy, for duty. Not for herself. Not for power. Not for prestige. And with that, the palace had its solution. Meghan was out. Zara was in. The chessboard was set. But here's the cliffhanger. Meghan wasn't in the dark for long. Word of Zara's decision reached her sooner than the palace expected. And when Meghan learned she was being replaced, not by a stranger, not by an outsider, but by her own cousin-in-law, her fury was unlike anything the monarchy had faced before. And what Meghan did in response to Zara's secret decision would ignite a battle that no amount of palace intrigue could contain. Dinner. On the surface, it was just another family gathering. But beneath the clinking of silverware, the polite laughter, and the familiar traditions of a royal meal, the fate of Meghan Markle's future in the monarchy was being decided. The dinner of decision, as some palace insiders now whisper about it, was no ordinary evening. It was the night where King Charles finally laid all his cards on the table, and Zara Tindall, the woman who had resisted titles her entire life, was cornered into making the choice that would alter royal history. Now, let me ask you, can you imagine sitting at a table where every glance, every word, every pause carries the weight of centuries of monarchy? Where the wrong choice doesn't just affect your family, it shifts the balance of an entire institution. That's what Zara faced. And that's why this dinner still looms like a ghost over everything that followed. The lead up to this evening had been tense. For weeks, Charles had been meeting privately with Anne, Camilla, and his most trusted aides. The whispers of Meghan's defiance, her rogue public appearances, her interviews painting herself as a victim, they weren't just frustrating anymore. They were dangerous. The monarchy, always fragile in its public image, couldn't afford to let Meghan dictate the narrative. And Charles, determined to prove his reign was not weak, was ready to act. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed Zara. Picture the dining room that evening. A long polished oak table, candlelight flickering against the gilded edges of the plates. The air thick with formality, but beneath it, a current of tension strong enough to make anyone's skin prickle. Charles at the head of the table, Camilla beside him, her expression calm but alert. And, upright and unsmiling, the embodiment of no-nonsense authority. And across from them, Zara and Mike Tindall, sitting in uncomfortable silence, fully aware that this wasn't just dinner. This was a summons. The meal itself was almost absurd in its normality. Courses of roasted lamb, seasonal vegetables, fine wine poured into crystal glasses. But who could taste anything with the conversation circling closer and closer to the unspoken truth? Small talk gave way to sharper questions. How are the children? Led into how is the equestrian career? And then, finally, Charles cleared his throat, put down his fork, and said the words that changed everything. It's time we speak plainly. The room froze. Even the clatter of cutlery seemed to stop. Zara looked at her cousin, now her king, and knew exactly what was coming. Charles laid it out with quiet authority. Meghan had become a liability. Her actions no longer aligned with the monarchy's interests. Every move she made threatened the dignity of the crown. And the Sussex title, once a proud banner for Harry and Meghan, had become a weapon wielded against the very institution that gave it. If the monarchy was to endure, the title had to be reclaimed. And he wanted Zara to carry it. Can you imagine Zara's heart in that moment? For years, she had refused titles, shunned the trappings of royal life, carved her own path in sport and family. And now, she was being asked to do the very thing she had spent a lifetime avoiding, step into the role of a duchess. Mike spoke first, breaking the silence. And what happens when Meghan finds out? His voice was steady, but the implication was clear. This wasn't just about duty. This was about the inevitable backlash, the media storm, the personal toll it would take on their lives. Charles, without hesitation, replied, "She will find out, and she will fight, but the crown must endure," and leaned in then, her voice sharper, firmer. "You're the only one who can do this, Zara. You've stayed out of the drama. You've built a life without titles, and precisely because of that, people trust you. This isn't about what you want. It's about what the monarchy needs." And there it was, the weight of centuries crashing down on Zara's shoulders. She wasn't just being asked to accept a duchess title. She was being asked to step into a battlefield, to replace Meghan Markle, to become the quiet, loyal counterpoint to the woman who had made the monarchy bleed. Zara hesitated. Of course she did. Who wouldn't? She thought of her children. She thought of her independence. She thought of the endless scrutiny that came with titles. But she also thought of her grandmother, the late queen, who had spent a lifetime sacrificing personal happiness for duty. She thought of her cousin William, who would one day sit on the throne. And she thought of Charles, who had waited 70 years for this crown, only to have it threatened within months by Meghan's defiance. The room held its breath as Zara finally spoke. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I do it for family. Not for power. Not for prestige. For family." Charles nodded, his relief palpable. Camilla's lips curved into a quiet smile, and, though stern, allowed herself the faintest nod of approval. The decision had been made. Zara would become the Duchess of Sussex. But the dinner didn't end there. The conversation shifted to strategy, how to announce it, how to handle Meghan, how to spin the story for the public. Advisors later described it as one of the most delicate operations in modern royal history, because they knew Meghan wouldn't take it lying down. She would rage. She would retaliate. She would use every connection she had to fight back. The palace had to be prepared. And Meghan? She wasn't at that table. She wasn't even in the room. But the decisions made that night sealed her fate. While she smiled for cameras, attended events, and spoke defiantly about her independence, her royal role was being dismantled over a dinner she never even knew was happening. Here's the question for you. Do you think Zara's decision was truly her own? Or was it forced, coerced, a sacrifice she made under pressure from a system that doesn't take no for an answer? Was she stepping into destiny, or into a trap laid by Charles and Anne? Because while that dinner seemed like the solution, it was really the spark. Meghan would find out. She always found out. And when she did, the storm that followed would make every scandal before look like child's play. And what Meghan did after learning of Zara's decision would send shockwaves through the monarchy. A counterattack no one at that dinner saw coming. Counterattack. That word defined Meghan Markle the moment she discovered the palace's secret plan. The dinner she hadn't been invited to. The whispers she wasn't meant to hear. The decision that carved her out of the royal equation and handed her title, her brand, her identity to someone else. Meghan has always thrived when she's cornered. Some call it resilience. Others call it calculation. But whatever you name it, one thing is certain. She wasn't about to take Zara Tindall's rise lying down. Now, let me put this question to you. If someone stripped you of everything you'd fought to hold on to, your position, your influence, your public identity, would you quietly fade away? Or would you strike back, harder, sharper, louder than ever before? Meghan chose the latter. And in doing so, She escalated a private palace maneuver into a global confrontation. The first move came swiftly. Meghan leaned into her strongest weapon, the media. Hollywood was her turf, not Windsor. She had contacts, producers, PR strategists, and sympathetic journalists ready to give her a platform. Almost overnight, subtle headlines began to shift. Leaks about Meghan's mistreatment resurfaced. Stories about her charitable endeavors multiplied. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. Meghan was crafting her counter-narrative, the image of a woman wronged, stripped of her rightful place, but rising above the cruelty of the crown. But she didn't stop there. Meghan knew the power of symbolism. Every outfit, every smile, every carefully staged paparazzi shot was part of her arsenal. She was photographed at high-profile Hollywood gatherings, flanked by allies who carried weight in politics and entertainment. She laughed louder, smiled brighter, stood taller. The message was clear. You can push me out of the palace, but you can't erase me. And yet, beneath the polished appearances, fury simmered. Sources close to Meghan claimed she felt humiliated, betrayed, blindsided by Zara's acceptance of the Duchess title. To Meghan, Zara wasn't just a cousin-in-law. She was the embodiment of hypocrisy. Here was a woman who had rejected titles her whole life, suddenly stepping into Meghan's shoes at the very moment Meghan was forced out. Imagine the sting of that irony. Harry, of course, was caught in the middle. His loyalty was stretched to breaking point. On one side stood his father, his cousin, the institution he'd been born into. On the other side, Meghan, the woman he'd given everything up for. And now, she was demanding his full allegiance in a war against the very family he was already estranged from. Friends whispered about the arguments, the late-night fights, the visible tension between the couple. Harry wanted to protect Meghan, but deep down, he knew Charles had played the long game. And Zara? Zara wasn't the enemy. She was family. This is where Meghan's counterattack grew sharper. She began making calls. Hollywood power players, influential journalists, even American politicians sympathetic to her outsider narrative. Meghan rallied them all. Plans for new projects surfaced, documentaries that would tell her truth, books that promised revelations. Meghan wasn't just fighting for relevance. She was threatening to expose the monarchy in ways Charles dreaded. And here's the irony. The palace expected Meghan to rage. What they didn't expect was how quickly she would mobilize her allies. Meghan wasn't fighting with tears, she was fighting with strategy. Just as Charles had played chess, Meghan now played poker, bluffing with cards that might or might not exist, but daring the monarchy to call her hand. Publicly, she leaned harder into her humanitarian image. Speeches about women's empowerment, about racial equality, about truth and resilience. But if you listen closely, her words carried edge, almost as if they were coded jabs at the crown. Silencing women, she said in one keynote, never makes them disappear. It only makes their voices louder. Was that about global feminism, or was it about Charles and Zara? The audience clapped either way, but the palace knew. And then came the most shocking twist of all. A leak. A private letter Meghan had allegedly written to Charles surfaced in the press. In it, Meghan outlined her frustrations, her grievances, her pleas to remain part of the royal fold. The letter, whether leaked intentionally or not, painted her as vulnerable, even desperate, a direct contradiction to the strong, independent image she was projecting publicly. For critics, it was proof of hypocrisy. For supporters, it was proof of cruelty from the palace. Either way, the damage was done. Now let me ask you, do you think Meghan leaked that letter herself to garner sympathy? Or do you think the palace planted it to undermine her carefully crafted counterattack? Either way, the result was the same. Meghan was back in headlines, her pain dissected, her motives questioned. But Meghan wasn't finished. The counterattack had just begun. There were whispers of a tell-all memoir in progress, one that would go even further than Harry's spare. Rumors of a bombshell documentary deal swirled. Meghan was turning her fury into content, her humiliation into profit. And each rumor was another warning shot at Charles. If you silence me, I'll make sure the world hears everything. Zara, meanwhile, stayed silent. That silence, ironically, made Meghan look louder, more desperate. Every time Meghan lashed out, Zara's quiet dignity won her more admiration from the public. Meghan was trying to reclaim control, But her own defiance was fueling the narrative Charles wanted all along. Meghan as the disruptive outsider, Zara as the loyal insider. And that's the tragedy of Meghan's counterattack. In fighting back so hard, she gave Charles more justification, more ammunition, more reason to say, this is why she had to go. But here's the cliffhanger. Meghan wasn't just throwing punches in the press. She had one last card up her sleeve, a move so shocking that even her allies questioned whether she'd really go through with it. And when she revealed it, the entire monarchy, Charles, Zara, Harry, even William, would be forced to react. Because Meghan's counterattack wasn't just about saving her title. It was about survival. And survival, as history shows us, often pushes people to the brink. And what Meghan unveiled next would leave even her harshest critics stunned, and no one saw it coming. Torn. That's the only word that truly captures Prince Harry's place in this saga. Torn between the father who raised him and the wife he swore to protect. Torn between the duty that shaped him and the freedom he chased. Torn between a family bound by blood and a woman bound to his heart. And as Meghan's counterattack gained speed, Harry's role became the most painful, most dramatic piece of the puzzle. Now let me ask you this. What would you do if you were Harry? Would you side with your wife, the woman who left everything behind for you? Or would you stand by your father, the man who is not just your parent, but your king? Every choice Harry made in this moment was going to hurt someone he loved. And that's what makes this chapter so tragic. At first, Harry tried to do what he always did, protect Meghan. From the earliest days of their relationship, Harry positioned himself as her shield. He remembered Diana, his mother, destroyed by the press, abandoned by the palace. He swore Meghan would never endure the same. He cut ties with old friends, distanced himself from family, and even moved across the ocean to give her peace. But here's the irony. The more he fought for Meghan, the further he drifted from the only identity he'd ever known, the royal. And now, with Charles quietly maneuvering Meghan out and Zara stepping into the Sussex role, Harry faced an impossible reality. His defense of Meghan no longer meant protecting her from nasty headlines. It now meant standing against his own father's reign. Imagine the conversations. Meghan urging him to take her side fully, to denounce the decision, to publicly reject the palace. Charles reminding him of his duty, of the monarchy's survival, of the family legacy. William, quietly but firmly, warning him that his loyalty to Meghan was pushing him into irrelevance. Harry caught in the middle, torn by a storm of loyalty, guilt, and love. And here's the emotional contradiction. Harry loved Meghan fiercely. That much is undeniable. But deep down, he loved his family too. He missed them. He missed the brotherhood with William, the guidance of his grandmother, the comfort of familiarity in the palace corridors. Exile wasn't easy. And as Meghan ramped up her counterattack, Harry began to feel something he hadn't before: exhaustion. Publicly, he stood beside her. At events, in interviews, in speeches, Harry echoed Meghan's narrative. He spoke of pain, of healing, of choosing love over duty. But privately, the cracks were showing. Friends described him as distracted, restless, even regretful. Not regretful about marrying Meghan, no. Regretful about how far things had spiraled. Regretful that his fight to protect her had brought him to war with his father. And Zara? Harry's relationship with her had always been warm. Zara was the cousin who never judged him, who laughed with him, who treated him as a brother rather than a prince. She had been there through his rebellious youth, his military service, his highs and lows. And now, she was being painted as Meghan's replacement. How could Harry reconcile that? Did he blame Zara? Or did he secretly understand why she said yes? That's the agony of Harry's role. His wife saw Zara as the enemy. His heart saw her as family. Let's pause here and ask, do you think Harry could have stopped Meghan's counterattack? If he had told her to step back, to stop escalating, would she have listened? Or was Meghan too deep in her own fight to hear him? Because as this battle raged on, Harry began to fracture under the pressure. His interviews became more emotional, sometimes rambling, sometimes contradictory. One day he'd defend Meghan as his partner against cruelty. The next, he'd speak of missing family ties. It was as though Harry himself didn't know which side of himself he truly belonged to. And here's the cruelest part. To Charles, Harry was no longer just a son. He was an obstacle. Every time Harry defended Meghan, It was proof that the Sussex brand was too fractured to survive within the crown. To Meghan, Harry was her only hope, the prince who gave her legitimacy, the royal blood that made her duchess. And to Zara, Harry was collateral damage. Her acceptance of the title meant betraying him in some way, and she knew it. But history doesn't pause for personal heartbreak. Harry had to act. He had to pick a side. And that's when the breaking point came. A confrontation, raw and painful, between father and son. Charles told Harry plainly, "You must decide where your loyalty lies." Imagine the sting of those words. A son being told to choose between his wife and his bloodline. Harry's answer? Public silence, but private despair. He didn't walk away from Meghan. He couldn't. But he didn't confront Zara either. He kept his head down, his voice quieter than hers, his presence fading into the background while Meghan fought louder and harder. And in that silence, people began to see Harry not as a hero or a rebel, but as a man broken by the impossible tug-of-war between love and legacy. But here's the cliffhanger. Just when it seemed Harry would remain a passive player, watching Meghan and Charles battle it out, he surprised everyone. He made a move no one expected, one that would shock the palace, shake Meghan, and force the world to reevaluate whose side he was truly on. And that move, once revealed, would turn the battle from a family feud into a global spectacle, and no one saw it coming. The room was thick with tension, a suffocating mix of expectation, strategy, and unspoken threats. Zara Tindall, usually the image of poise and casual confidence, sat quietly at the head of the table. Around her, advisors, palace officials, and even a few silent security staff lingered, each waiting for the decision that would alter the course of the monarchy in ways no one could have anticipated. You might be asking yourself right now, how did Zara, the equestrian queen of calm, suddenly become the focal point of a royal showdown between Meghan Markle and King Charles? Let me take you back. Zara had always been the safe cousin, the one the media adored for her athleticism, her grace, and her choice to live life largely outside the glittering, suffocating spotlight of royalty. But when whispers of Meghan Markle's growing influence and Charles's silent campaign to curb her duties started circulating, Zara found herself thrust into a position she never sought, the potential Duchess of Sussex. Yes, you heard that right. Zara Tindall, the untouchable, the distant cousin, now standing at the precipice of Sussex royalty. The palace had been strategic. Over weeks, Charles quietly tested Zara's resolve, planting subtle hints of opportunity. "We need someone with loyalty and discretion," an advisor had suggested. "Someone who understands tradition but can navigate modern challenges." Zara had shrugged initially, thinking it was just polite royal flattery. But soon, the invitations became clearer, the conversations more pointed. Charles wasn't just testing her. He was extending an olive branch and a gauntlet. Now, consider the implications. Meghan had carved out a space in the royal landscape that was loud, brash, and impossible to ignore. Her social campaigns, her interviews, and her growing public clout made her presence almost unmanageable for Charles. Every event she attended seemed to spark headlines. Every statement she released echoed across the globe. And the palace needed stability. Someone like Zara, someone predictable, loyal, yet capable of carrying a Sussex title with dignity. Imagine the mental gymnastics Zara had to perform. On one hand, there was Meghan, the polarizing figure, demanding the space she believed was hers. On the other hand, Charles offered Zara a position of unprecedented responsibility, the chance to step into a role that could redefine her family legacy. And she knew one truth above all else. Saying yes would make her a target, thrusting her into the storm that Meghan had created. In the early hours of the morning before her formal decision, Zara walked through the palace gardens, her mind racing. The dewy grass under her boots, the chirping of birds in the crisp autumn air, the distant hum of London traffic. None of it mattered. Every scenario played in her head like a chess game she hadn't asked to join. Should she accept and risk being caught in a war between Meghan and Charles? Or decline and maintain the peaceful life she'd carefully curated? And here's the fascinating twist. Zara was not immune to the allure of power. Royals are trained to understand influence, the weight of a name, the ripple effect of each choice. Saying yes wasn't just about supporting Charles. It was about stepping into a narrative bigger than herself, about claiming a mantle that could shift public perception and redefine the monarchy. Could she balance her own desires with the inevitable fallout? Meanwhile, Meghan had no idea this was happening behind the scenes. She believed she controlled the narrative, that Harry's loyalty would shield her, that the Sussex brand was untouchable. But Zara's quiet negotiations, her thoughtful considerations, and her measured approach were completely invisible to Meghan. The irony? Meghan had spent years strategizing visibility and influence, yet the silent cousin was about to upend her plans in one calculated move. When Zara finally took a seat in the council room, the air felt electric. Charles, seated opposite, gave a subtle nod, a gesture of trust, and perhaps a hint of expectation. Advisors whispered in hushed tones, aware that this moment would decide the shape of royal responsibilities for years to come. Then Zara spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I understand the responsibilities. I understand the implications. And I am ready to step forward." The room exhaled collectively, but the tension did not lift. In accepting, Zara wasn't just agreeing to a title. She was stepping into a storm that would test her character, her family loyalty, and her resilience in ways that could not yet be imagined. Meghan, when she eventually discovered this move, would feel the sting of a carefully orchestrated shift that undermined her influence without a single word being publicly spoken. And what about Harry? The emotional turmoil for him is unimaginable. He had been caught between two worlds. His wife, whose ambition and public presence had defined his life for years, and the family that he had once idolized, now asking him to stand aside as Zara assumed the very mantle that Meghan had fought to maintain. Harry's silence, once a protective shield for Meghan, now felt like a betrayal in the making. Could he reconcile his love for Meghan with the reality unfolding before him? Could he navigate a new dynamic where his cousin, his brother-in-law's sister-in-law, now stood at the heart of royal power? The palace corridors buzzed with speculation. Courtiers, staff, and even foreign dignitaries sensed the seismic shift. Public perception was on the cusp of transformation. The monarchy was about to send a clear signal. Meghan's reign, however loud and brash, was being tempered by tradition, loyalty, and strategic placement of trusted family members. And here's the dramatic irony. Zara, who had lived most of her life outside the glare, would now be the linchpin in a battle she hadn't sought. She would have to navigate Meghan's resentment, Harry's conflicted loyalty, Charles's expectations, and the public's insatiable appetite for royal drama. Every event she attended, every public statement she made, every smile or subtle gesture would be dissected, analyzed, and politicized. But Zara was no stranger to challenge. Her years in competitive equestrian sports had forged a resilience few could match. She understood pressure, competition, and the mental toughness needed to succeed on the global stage. The palace had just handed her the ultimate test, one that combined all of her skills in diplomacy, strategy, and emotional intelligence. And as she left the room, formally accepting the responsibilities and title, Zara knew one undeniable truth. This was only the beginning. Meghan's response, Harry's reaction, and the palace's next moves would escalate the drama beyond anything the public could anticipate. Every step forward would be scrutinized, every decision dissected, every word twisted. And Zara, once the quiet cousin, would be at the center of it all. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The news broke like a thunderclap. Zara Tindall, the cousin who had spent her entire life avoiding royal titles, had stepped into the void left by Meghan Markle. The Duchess of Sussex mantle, once Meghan's crown jewel of identity, was now in Zara's hands. And almost instantly, the world split into two camps. Those who celebrated Zara's quiet loyalty, and those who saw it as yet another cruel humiliation for Meghan. Now let me ask you this. When the monarchy makes a move this bold, is it really just about duty? Or is it about winning the war of public perception? Because what unfolded next was not just about Zara or Meghan. It was about the image of the monarchy itself, about who controlled the narrative on the global stage. The UK media was the first to pounce. Tabloid front pages screamed with triumphant headlines. Charles restores order. Zara, the Duchess the nation trusts. Meghan out, loyalty in. Commentators praised Charles.